The boutique was busy with its usual upscale crowd, all browsing through the latest fashion trends. A young black woman, dressed casually but with a sharp eye for style, stepped into the boutique. She had been looking forward to this day, excited to find a perfect outfit for an upcoming event that meant a lot to her. As soon as she walked in, the soft hum of conversations and the rustle of clothes shifting on racks filled the air. The shop was calm, the light shining brightly on the elegant displays, showcasing dresses and suits of every color. She wasn't new to the luxury shopping experience. Having grown up around the finer things in life, she knew the drill: how to blend in, how to look confident, and how to get what she needed without causing a scene. But today there was something in the air that made her feel a little out of place, as if the universe had shifted slightly. She strolled through the aisles, touching the fabrics, admiring the patterns, and imagining herself in each item. A soft silk blouse here, a tailored blazer there. Everything she picked up felt almost perfect. Yet she couldn't make up her mind. Nothing seemed to stand out as the one. The boutique had an exclusive air about it. Everything was pristine, organized with precision, and the store was filled with customers who seemed at ease, confident in their selections. It wasn't long before the boutique manager, a middle-aged woman dressed in a smart, crisp suit, walked toward her with a practiced smile. The manager's eyes scanned her as if trying to figure out what kind of shopper she was. Perhaps it was the young woman's calm demeanor or the fact that she didn't seem to be in a rush, but something about her drew the manager in. "Can I help you find something?" the manager asked, her tone polite but with an edge of expectation. The woman turned toward her with a smile, appreciative of the offer, but not yet ready to commit to anything. "I'm just looking for a dress for a special occasion," she responded, her voice smooth, but there was something in her eyes that hinted at her inner frustration. She wasn't sure why she hadn't found what she was looking for. After all, this store had everything she could want, or so it seemed. The manager nodded, understanding that she was dealing with someone who was used to being picky or perhaps indecisive. She watched the woman for a moment longer, then stepped closer. "I'm sure we can find something perfect for you. Let me know if you need anything." But the young woman, still deep in thought, didn't respond right away. She was just about to pick up another dress when the manager's patience seemed to wear thin. Maybe it was because she had other customers to attend to, or maybe she just didn't like being ignored, but she suddenly snapped. "You're wasting my time," the manager said sharply, her voice rising a little, catching the young woman off guard. Without another word, the manager took a step forward and, in a quick, reflexive motion, slapped her across the face. It wasn't a heavy blow, but it was enough to leave the young woman stunned. For a split second, everything went silent. The young woman froze. The shock wasn't just from the slap. It was from the sheer audacity of what had just happened. The manager stood there, looking at her with wide eyes, as if she hadn't quite processed what she had just done. There was a brief moment of stillness before everything seemed to crash back into motion. The young woman's hand instinctively went to her cheek, her heart pounding. But she didn't say anything at first. She wasn't sure how to react. It was like something inside of her clicked. This wasn't just about the slap. It was about the deeper, more uncomfortable feeling that this moment was more than just a personal offense. Something about the situation felt wrong in ways she couldn't yet explain. The boutique manager's expression shifted from a brief moment of shock to one of panic as she realized the mistake she had just made. But it was already too late. The slap, though not hard, seemed to echo through the boutique, a jarring sound that caught the attention of the few other customers in the store. For a moment, the entire room felt frozen in time. The young woman stood there, her hand pressed gently to her cheek, trying to process what had just happened. It wasn't the physical sting that took her by surprise. It was the sheer unexpectedness of it. She hadn't done anything to provoke such a reaction. She was simply browsing, taking her time to find the right dress. And yet here she was, standing in the middle of a boutique, slapped by a stranger. The boutique manager, who had acted so confidently just moments ago, now seemed lost for words. She stood a few feet away, her mouth slightly agape, staring at the young woman. Her face had gone pale, and her eyes darted from the young woman's hand on her cheek to her own trembling hands. She opened her mouth as if to say something, but no words came out at first. Did I just do that?" the manager asked quietly, as if trying to make sense of her own actions. Her voice trembled with nervousness, and for the first time, she seemed like the one unsure of herself. The young woman didn't reply immediately. Instead, she stared at the manager, her mind racing. She couldn't believe what had just happened. The shock of the slap hadn't even fully worn off yet, but now there was this weird, almost surreal moment where the manager seemed to be struggling with the reality of her own behavior. The young woman's first instinct was to walk away, to leave the store and never come back. But something inside of her, something deep and quiet, held her still. She wasn't going to let this slide. Not this time. She had dealt with too much in her life to let someone treat her this way without standing up for herself. Slowly, she took a deep breath and straightened her back. There was no anger in her movements, no immediate rush to make a scene. She simply turned to the manager, her eyes meeting hers. The calmness in her gaze was enough to make the manager flinch. "You can't just slap people, especially when they've done nothing wrong," the young woman said, her voice steady but firm. There was a quiet authority in her words, as though she had spoken them 1,000 times before. The manager opened her mouth to respond, but the words caught in her throat. She seemed almost too shocked to speak. Her face flushed red as she took a hesitant step forward. I'm so sorry," the manager stammered, her hands wringing together in nervousness. "I didn't mean to. I don't know what came over me." But the young woman wasn't sure she could accept the apology just yet. She stood silently for a moment, considering how she should respond. The sting of the slap had faded, but the hurt was still there. She wasn't just upset at the physical action. It was the disrespect, the assumption that she could be treated that way because of who she was, what she looked like. "You shouldn't have done that," the young woman said, her voice softer now, but with an undeniable edge. "You can't treat people like that, no matter who they are." The manager nodded, her eyes wide with guilt, but still, there was something about the situation that didn't sit right with the young woman. It wasn't just about the slap. It was about the way she had been treated, as if her presence in the boutique was a nuisance rather than a privilege. It was clear that the manager hadn't expected the young woman to stand up for herself. She seemed unsure of how to proceed, her mind racing for a solution. As the tension between them hung in the air, the young woman took another breath, preparing herself for the next step. She wasn't sure how far she wanted to take this, but she knew one thing for certain. This wasn't over yet. The young woman stood still, watching the manager closely as she continued to apologize. She could see the manager was genuinely shaken, her hands now wringing nervously at her sides. It was clear the woman had never expected the situation to escalate like this, and now, it seemed she wasn't quite sure how to handle the aftermath. The young woman's gaze softened slightly. She didn't want to cause a scene, but she also wasn't going to just let this go. As the manager continued to babble apologies, the young woman took a deep breath, deciding it was time to speak up, to make sure this moment meant something. "You can't just treat people that way," she said again, her voice calm but firm. "I'm not some random shopper you can dismiss because I'm not dressed in the latest designer clothes." Her word hung in the air, as though challenging the manager to truly understand the weight of her actions. "It's about respect. You can't just assume things about someone based on how they look or where they're from." The boutique manager looked down at the floor, clearly avoiding eye contact. She seemed embarrassed, almost ashamed, and it was evident she was realizing just how wrong her behavior had been. "I didn't mean to." She stammered again, her voice quieter now, almost regretful. "I was frustrated. I'd just been dealing with a lot of pressure lately and..." She cut herself off, shaking her head, as if she were trying to explain away the slap with some excuse. The young woman didn't respond right away. She was still processing everything, trying to make sense of how the manager had let her frustration take over in such an extreme way. But something was nagging at her, something she couldn't quite ignore. The slap was bad, but the assumption, the quick judgment that led to it, felt like the bigger issue. The manager was still fumbling with her words, but the young woman could tell her apology wasn't just a reflex anymore. It was sincere. She could see that the manager was regretting what had happened, but that didn't change the fact that it had happened in the first place. It wasn't just about her. It was about everyone who had ever been treated poorly because of assumptions, stereotypes, or quick judgments. Finally, the young woman spoke again, her voice softer this time. "You know, you don't have to apologize over and over again. I'm not looking for an apology. I'm looking for understanding. Maybe it's time we all start realizing that who we are doesn't just come from what we wear or how we act on the outside. There's more to it than that." There was a long pause as the manager absorbed her words. The room felt heavy, and the young woman could feel the weight of the silence stretching out between them. But then, something shifted. The manager looked up at her, and for the first time, she met her gaze with genuine remorse. "I'm so sorry," the manager said again. But this time, it didn't feel like an empty apology. It was clear that she understood the gravity of what had happened. "You're right. I didn't really see you, and I've learned a valuable lesson here today." The young woman nodded, her own emotions still raw, but she felt something shift inside her too. She wasn't sure what would happen next, but she knew this was the moment things had to change. Not just between her and the manager, but maybe even in the way people saw each other in this world. It wasn't enough to just apologize. It was about being better, doing better. She took a step back, giving the manager space to process her words. It wasn't over yet, but she felt a sense of relief, knowing she had stood her ground. She wasn't going to let this situation define her, but she was going to make sure it wasn't forgotten either. As the young woman stood there, watching the manager struggle with her words, she felt a wave of emotions rise up in her. There was a part of her that wanted to forgive the manager immediately, to end the uncomfortable moment and just walk away. But there was another part of her, a stronger part, that knew this situation needed to go beyond an apology. She wasn't angry anymore. Instead, she was thinking about all the people who had been treated unfairly for reasons beyond their control. She was thinking about how easy it was for someone to judge another person based on assumptions, how easy it was for someone to let their frustration take over and make decisions they would later regret. But what really bothered her was how the manager had never even considered that she might be someone with a story, someone worthy of respect. It wasn't just about the slap. It was about being seen as less than. And she couldn't let that go. The boutique manager, on the other hand, was starting to visibly deflate. She had stopped talking, her hands now flat on the counter, as if she were bracing herself for whatever was coming next. The young woman could see the weight of her own mistakes settling over her, and it was clear she was feeling deeply embarrassed. "I'm not asking for anything from you," the young woman said, her voice softer now but firm. "I'm not looking for some big apology, but what I do want is for you to understand that there are people out there, people like me, who face these things every day. And it's not just about one moment, one mistake. It's about a pattern of how we're treated because of who we are, where we come from, or how we look. That's what needs to change." For a moment, the manager didn't say anything. She just stood there, her shoulders slumped, her eyes focused on the floor. It was as if she were absorbing the weight of the young woman's words, understanding how much deeper this issue went than just one incident. After what felt like a long time, the manager finally spoke, her voice much quieter now, almost reverent. "You're right," she said. "I didn't see you. I saw a customer, someone I could push through the store as quickly as possible, but I didn't see who you really were, and I'm ashamed of that." The young woman nodded slowly, her expression softening just a bit. She wasn't expecting the manager to suddenly become a different person, but there was something in her apology that felt sincere now. Maybe it wasn't just about fixing this one interaction. It was about understanding that the world needed more than just apologies. It needed action. It needed change. "I'm not asking you to be perfect," the young woman continued. "I'm asking you to think about how your actions affect people. We all have moments where we mess up. We all have times when we let our emotions take over. But it's what we do after those moments that matter. If we keep learning, if we keep growing, then we can make things better." The manager nodded again, looking the young woman in the eyes for the first time since the incident. There was a deep sincerity in her gaze now, as if she had truly understood the gravity of what the young woman was saying. "I promise you, I'll do better. I won't let my frustrations dictate how I treat people. Not again." The young woman gave her a small, almost imperceptible smile. It wasn't a smile of forgiveness or acceptance. It was a smile of recognition. She recognized the manager's effort to change, to learn from her mistake. That was enough for her. "Thank you," the young woman said, turning toward the door. "I hope you keep your word." As she walked out of the boutique, she felt a strange sense of relief. It wasn't because the situation was over. It was because, in that moment, she had chosen to stand up not just for herself, but for everyone who had ever been misunderstood or mistreated. She knew this wasn't the end of her journey. It was just the beginning. After the incident in the boutique, things started to unfold in unexpected ways. The young woman left the store, but she couldn't shake the feeling that the encounter would follow her for days to come. It wasn't just about the slap anymore. It was about the ripple effect it created. She didn't realize at the time, but her calm response to the situation would soon make its way into the headlines. In the days that followed, the story of the boutique slap spread like wildfire across social media. It wasn't long before people were talking about it, commenting on it, and even making their own videos about the incident. News outlets picked it up, turning a private moment into something much larger. The young woman, a regular customer in an upscale boutique, had been slapped by the manager, but she didn't scream, didn't react with anger. Instead, she stayed calm, spoke up about respect, and left the store with her head held high. The story went viral, and with it came a flood of reactions. Some people were outraged on her behalf, questioning how a store could allow such behavior from an employee. Others praised the young woman for handling the situation with such grace, calling her a role model for standing up for herself without losing her composure. On the other side, a few people criticized the manager's actions, but some were quick to point out that everyone makes mistakes. Despite the whirlwind of attention, the young woman remained focused. She had never intended for her story to make headlines, but she understood why it had. Her calmness in the face of injustice had struck a chord with people, especially those who had experienced similar treatment or discrimination. It became something bigger than just one mistake. It became a conversation about how people are treated based on their appearance or background. Meanwhile, the boutique manager found herself at the center of the media storm as well. Her face appeared in news articles, her name dragged into the spotlight. She had never imagined that a simple frustration with a customer would lead to such a public fallout. She quickly realized that her actions had consequences far beyond the boutique's walls. The store's reputation, once pristine, began to tarnish as more people questioned its treatment of customers. As the story gained more traction, the young woman received a call from a reporter. The request was simple: an interview. The reporter wanted to know more about her side of the story, how she felt, what she had learned, and what message she wanted to send to the world. It was a daunting thought. She wasn't a public speaker. She wasn't someone who sought attention. But the reporter's questions were gentle, respectful, and they helped her see the bigger picture. "I didn't want to make this a public issue," she told the reporter, "but I think it's important. We need to talk about how we treat each other, especially in places like this, where people are supposed to be at their best." The interview quickly garnered attention, with many people agreeing that the situation represented something much larger than just one slap. It was about how respect, or the lack of it, could shape someone's experience in the world. The young woman's calm demeanor had turned her into an unexpected voice for change, and she wasn't sure how to feel about it. But in her heart, she knew this moment had power. It wasn't just about her. It was about making sure something like this wouldn't happen again. As the days passed, the story continued to gain attention. The young woman found herself in the center of something she hadn't planned on, but she couldn't ignore the weight of it. Her calm handling of the situation had turned her into a symbol of dignity and strength. The media coverage, while overwhelming, only seemed to reinforce the message she wanted to spread. Respect is something we all deserve, no matter who we are or where we come from. One morning, just as the news cycle around the incident was reaching its peak, the phone rang. The young woman picked it up, expecting it to be another reporter or a friend checking in. But when she heard the deep, familiar voice on the other end, her heart skipped a beat. "Hello, is this the young woman from the boutique incident?" Shaquille O'Neal's voice boomed through the receiver. She froze for a second, not sure if she had heard him correctly. Shaquille O'Neal, the legendary basketball player, the larger-than-life figure who had dominated the courts, was calling her. She hadn't expected this. She'd been in the spotlight, sure, but not like this. "Yes, this is her," she replied, trying to keep her voice steady despite the shock. "Listen," he said, "I've seen what happened, and I just want you to know I'm proud of how you handled yourself. I want to make sure you're okay, and I'd like to speak with you about the whole thing. It's important that people see that what you did wasn't just about you. It was about all of us." The young woman's mind raced. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. Shaquille O'Neal, her father, was calling her, offering his support and wanting to talk about it. She wasn't sure how to process it all, but she knew one thing: he cared, and that meant everything. "I appreciate that, Dad," she said, her voice finally steady, though her heart still raced. "I didn't expect this to go this far, but I'm glad it's sparking conversations. Maybe it'll help someone, you know." There was a brief pause on the other end of the line, as if he were carefully considering his words. Then he spoke again, this time with more intensity. "It's not just about you. You did something that a lot of people don't have the strength to do. You stood up for yourself without making a scene. That takes real courage. People need to understand that it's not okay to disrespect others, especially when they're trying to be polite and patient." The conversation was brief but meaningful. After they hung up, the young woman sat quietly, reflecting on everything her father had said. She had known he was proud of her, but hearing it from him directly made everything feel more real. It wasn't just about handling a single situation. It was about teaching others how to treat people with respect, no matter who they were or where they came from. The following day, the young woman made the decision to publicly speak out, not just for herself, but for the countless others who had experienced similar injustices. She knew her father's support was a powerful tool, but this was her story, and she needed to use her voice to make a lasting impact. Shaquille O'Neal's words resonated in her mind as she prepared for an upcoming interview with a major news outlet. She wasn't going to let this moment slip away without making sure the message was heard loud and clear. When the interview finally aired, it was nothing like what anyone expected. There was no anger, no bitterness, just a calm, composed young woman sharing her experience and the lessons she had learned. She didn't need to raise her voice to be heard. Her story, her strength, and her message were enough. The days following the interview were a whirlwind of emotions. The young woman had shared her story, and now the world was listening. She could feel the weight of it all, but there was also a sense of pride in knowing that she had sparked something meaningful. It wasn't just about her anymore. It was about how people treated each other, how quickly judgments were made, and how much we could all learn from the experience. She had become a voice for those who had been treated unfairly, for those who had silently endured slights and disrespect, often without ever having the chance to speak up. As the story continued to spread, people began to reach out to her from all walks of life. Some shared their own experiences of mistreatment, while others simply expressed their gratitude for how she had handled the situation. It wasn't just about the slap anymore. It was about the larger conversation she had started. The young woman had given people the courage to share their own stories and speak up against injustice. But with the praise also came the pressure. The young woman wasn't used to being in the public eye, and the constant attention, though well-meaning, started to weigh heavily on her. She was receiving messages from fans, reporters, even strangers, all wanting to share their thoughts or ask her questions. At first, it felt empowering, but over time, she began to feel overwhelmed. She never asked for this level of attention. She just wanted things to change, not to become the face of the movement. The boutique had reached out as well, offering a public apology and explaining that the manager involved had been let go. While the apology seemed sincere, it also felt hollow to her. She knew the issue wasn't just about one woman's actions. It was a reflection of a much bigger problem. The apology didn't change the fact that the incident had happened, and it didn't erase the pain she had felt in the moment. Still, she appreciated the gesture. It was a step in the right direction, even if it was just a small one. The media didn't let up either. More interviews came, and more invitations for speaking engagements rolled in. The young woman was asked to share her perspective on various talk shows, and her story was being discussed on platforms from social media to news outlets. At times, it felt like the whole world had turned its focus on her, and she wasn't sure how to process it all. She had gone from an ordinary woman looking for a dress in a boutique to a symbol of courage and strength in the face of adversity. But with the attention came a realization. This was her chance to make a difference. She realized that the platform she had been given wasn't just an opportunity to talk about the incident in the boutique. It was an opportunity to advocate for change. She had been given a voice, and she wasn't going to let it go to waste. She started speaking out about the importance of empathy, of seeing people as individuals rather than making assumptions based on their appearance. She talked about the need for respect and how we all needed to do better. She wanted to make sure that people didn't forget the lesson behind her story, that kindness and understanding were more important than jumping to conclusions. One evening, as she sat alone in her living room, reflecting on everything that had happened, she received another call. This time, it was from her father. Shaquille O'Neal's voice was familiar and comforting, a reminder of the strong family support she had always known. "You've done something incredible," he said. "I'm proud of you, and I know the world is too. But remember, it's not about the fame or the attention. It's about making real change, one step at a time. Keep going, no matter what." His words resonated deeply. She wasn't in this for the recognition. She was in it because she believed in the message. It wasn't about being the center of attention. It was about making sure people understood that respect for one another had to come first. She knew the journey was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning. As the weeks went by, the young woman found herself stepping into a new chapter of her life. What had started as an unexpected incident in a boutique had grown into something far bigger than she ever imagined. She had become a voice for change, an advocate for respect, and a symbol of strength. But more than that, she had gained a deeper understanding of herself and the world around her. She continued to share her story at events, on social media, and through interviews. People continued to reach out, sharing how her calm response in the face of adversity had inspired them. It wasn't just about the slap anymore. It was about the message that came with it. She wanted others to see that standing up for what's right didn't have to come with anger or hostility. It could be done with grace, with patience, and with the hope that things could get better. However, as much as she appreciated the support, she also began to realize that not everyone understood her message in the same way. There were still people who dismissed her words or reduced her actions to a simple moment of bravery. They didn't fully grasp the deeper impact of what she had said. That respect should be given to everyone, no matter their background, appearance, or status. But she didn't let that discourage her. She knew that change wasn't easy, and it wasn't going to happen overnight. The important thing was that the conversation had started. People were talking, and in her eyes, that was the first step. Whether it was in small groups or on social media platforms, discussions about respect, empathy, and treating others with dignity were taking root. The seeds of change had been planted, and she was determined to nurture them. One day, as she was sitting at home, reflecting on everything that had happened, she thought about her father's words. Shaquille O'Neal had been a constant source of support throughout this entire journey. His advice had guided her through the media storm and helped her stay focused on what truly mattered. "You've done something incredible," he had told her, and she believed it now. But it wasn't just about the attention or the recognition. It was about the lasting impact she could have. She wanted to make sure the conversation didn't stop with her. She wanted people to remember that this wasn't just about one individual experience. It was about how society treated people every day. The young woman decided to take her advocacy even further. She began collaborating with organizations that focused on diversity, equity, and inclusion. She joined groups that were dedicated to raising awareness about the challenges that people of color, especially Black women, faced in everyday life. It was important to her that she used her newfound platform for good, to not only share her own story, but to give a voice to those who didn't have the chance to speak up. She was no longer just a young woman who had been slapped by a boutique manager. She was a catalyst for change. She was a woman on a mission to ensure that future generations wouldn't have to fight the same battles, that they would grow up in a world where respect and kindness were given freely to everyone. As she stood at the podium at a community event, addressing a group of people who had gathered to listen to her speak, she felt a sense of peace. The path ahead was still uncertain, and the journey was far from over. But in that moment, she knew she had done something meaningful. She had turned an unfortunate event into an opportunity to make the world a little better. The young woman smiled as she looked out at the audience. She was no longer just the girl from the boutique. She was someone who had found her voice, someone who was determined to make a difference. And that, she knew, was just the beginning.